Greetings, folks. This video has to do with graphical vector manipulation. So let the fun begin. Okay, so the two types of functions that you have to worry about are scalars and vectors. Scalar is a quantity that has a magnitude but that does not have a direction attached to it. Temperature, for example, makes no sense to say 90 degrees up because temperature has no direction. It's a scalar. Vectors have both magnitude and direction. Force is an example of a vector. Acceleration is an example of a vector. Acceleration of gravity is 9.8 meters per second down. Direction matters because it's a vector. Notationally, vectors are usually denoted with a letter and an arrow over the letter. If you want just to denote just the magnitude without the direction, you put an absolute value sign around it. If you want to show pictorially the vector, you normally use an arrow with the arrow pointing in the direction of the vector. Okay, operations that you might have to deal with. If you have vector A and you'd like to know what minus A is, you essentially just flip it over. So the magnitude stays the same, but the direction is been flipped by 180 degrees. If you want 1/2 of A, direction stays the same, but the magnitude is cut in half. 1.5 times, direction the same, magnitude is 1.5 times. So let's say you have a group of vectors and you decide that you would like to add them. You pick one of the vectors, say A for instance, and you reproduce it to scale, keeping the orientation set. You take any other of the vectors, C for instance, you take its tail and you bring it down and attach it to the head, keeping the orientation set and drawing it to scale. Once you get C taken care of, you take any of the other vectors, B for instance, and you reproduce that operation. So you take its tail, you bring it down to the head of C, you reproduce B to scale. You do the same process with D. And once you get all of the vectors taken care of, you start where you started, you draw a vector that goes to where you end, and that is the vector sum of all the vectors in the system. This vector sum is called the resultant. If I want to subtract two vectors, I'll take the vector that I'm going to be subtracting, which in this case happens to be C. I'll flip it over to figure out what minus C is, and then I will simply add A to minus C. Once I get that graphical addition done, I simply start where I started and go to where I ended with a vector, and the resultant is A minus C. Anyway, this video has identified for you all of the graphical vector operations that you need to be able to deal with.